Welcome back to Questing Beast. Today we are taking a look at the Dungeon Master's Guide from AD&D. This is the next part in our continuing series of reading the entire thing out loud, something that I've never done before, and I think most people haven't done, and discovering all sorts of interesting things that we find in there. We're going to be beginning right here at the adventure, which, if you're following along, is on page 47 in the AD&D DMG. Before we get started, a quick shout out to our patron for this episode, which is Into the AM. Into the AM sells t-shirts with a lot of fantasy, sci-fi, or psychedelic themes. This is a recent one they sent me, which I think would work really well if you're running any sort of Dolmenwood setting or anything that involves a lot of fungi or esoteric and magical mushrooms. All of the shirts they've sent me are extremely high quality and very comfortable. I now wear them all the time. And they have a whole bunch of new t-shirts that are coming out within the next week or so. I put a link down in the description below where you can check out their website, and there is a 10% off of their entire web store if you use that link. Thanks again to Into the AM for sponsoring this video. And now let's get back to our reading. So, adventures in the outdoors. It is necessary to have a reasonably well-detailed, large-scale map for conducting adventures outdoors. Naturally, the initial adventuring in the campaign will be those in the small community and nearby underground maze. So, in AD&D, this was the assumption that there was mostly a mega dungeon that you were exploring, and that there was a small town nearby, and that the game mostly consisted of delving into the mega dungeon, going back to the town to resupply, and then repeating over and over again. For whatever reason, players desire quests or, I can never say this word, geese, or because of your own direction, adventuring will sooner or later move to the outdoors. What you must do to handle this is not difficult, following the general procedures given below. First, decide how you wish to proceed regarding the world at large. If you have plenty of time and ideas, you should design a continent or a large portion thereof, which perfectly meshes with your initial setting. If this is not possible, obtain one of the commercially available milieu and place the starting point of your campaign somewhere within this already created world. At the risk of being accused of being self-serving, I will mention parenthetically that my own World of Greyhawk, published by TSR, was specifically designed to allow for insertion of such beginning milieu, variety being great and history and organization left purposefully sketchy to make interfacing a simple matter. Whatever course you opt for, the scale of such world maps should be in the neighborhood of 20 to 40 miles per hexagon. Such areas allow mapping of considerable territories and are optimal for movement and smaller scale maps as well, dividing each large hex into blocks of smaller hexes, 5 across the middle or 5 across each face, as desired. Interesting. So here's some different scales that you can use. Yeah, a 20 to 40 mile hex is quite large. Typically, a party moving across very easy terrain at a good clip and that are very lightly encumbered can probably do 30 miles a day. That's if you're really pushing it. 40 miles is a lot. So moving from one hex to another, if they're 40 miles, would be pretty difficult. But 20 miles is pretty reasonable. So you'd have kind of a 1 hex per day situation. And then within each hex, you could have it broken down into things that made it more granular. Adventuring outdoors actually covers several sorts of adventuring, for it is a catch-all term for all activities not in underground or urban settings. Thus, under this general heading will be 4 major subheadings: land adventures, adventures in the air, waterborne adventures, and underwater adventures. Movement rates for land and water adventures are shown under movement. Underwater movement is the same as dungeon and similar indoor movement rates, as the locale of such adventures is always limited in area. Land adventures. Starting from the point of origin, your players will move over not only varying types of terrain, but through areas of varying human/demi-human population as well. Just as terrain will affect the frequency and type of monsters encountered, so will population dictate likelihood and type of encounter. You must therefore show population density on your large-scale map, or at least have some idea of it in mind as adventurers move across the land. The chance of encounter is set within the following bases. We have some tables for a chance of encounter. Population density, if it's relatively dense, then you have a 1 in 20 chance. Moderate to sparse is 1 in 12, and uninhabited is 1 in 10. And then we have a table for frequency of encounter chance time checks. So when you're likely to encounter things. And I'm not going to try and read this whole table out loud. Procedure. Daylight hours consist of morning, noon, and evening. Night consists of night, midnight, and pre-dawn. Interesting. So these sections, there's 6 sections here, which reminds me of the same procedure that we see in Hot Springs Island, where the day is divided into 6 watches of 4 hours each. These times equate to periods of about an hour after the party sets forth for the day, the midpoint of the journey, and near the end when camp is being made with respect to daylight hours. During hours of darkness, equate the periods to first, middle, and end sleep periods. Where only 1 or 2 chances for encounters exist, you may vary the time as you see fit in order to avoid player reliance on information which they should not be privy to. When an encounter check is indicated, roll the appropriate die, and if a 1 results, an encounter takes place. In this event, go to the appropriate table for the terrain and determine randomly what sort of monster is being encountered. Note, in areas where you have detailed the monster population, a random determination should not be necessary, as this information should be recorded by you. Oh, and we have a great piece of art here. This is by, I think that's Darlene, who is a D&D artist who did a lot of famous maps. I believe it's the same person. Looks like it says Darlene there. When an actual meeting does occur, consult the explanations accompanying the table for any special procedures to follow. Attempts by the encountering party to evade are dealt with under combat, pursuit, and evasion of pursuit. Encounter distance. If either party is surprised, the encounter distance is determined by subtracting the value of surprise, as determined by the die which indicated that the condition existed, from the normal encounter distance. Normal encounter distance is 6 inches to 24 inches. Note that when it says inches here, it typically means an inch on the tabletop, which would equate to 5 feet typically. Thus, a surprise roll of 1, for example, encounter distance is 5 inches to 23 inches. 164 minus 1. On a 2, the distance is 4 inches to 22 inches, etc. Interesting. In addition to shortening encounter distance, surprise also allows the surprising enemy to have that number of segments as shown on the die as the surprise factor as free and unanswered activity to move, shove, attack, flee, etc. See surprise. In addition to modification, for a surprise, terrain will also modify encounter distance as follows. Scrub, -1 per die on all 3s and 4s. Forest, -1 per die on all numbers. Zeros or hundreds perhaps are possible. Marsh, -1 per die on all 2s, 3s, and 4s. That's really interesting. It's a very unique system where you're applying modifiers to only particular numbers. I wonder what kind of curves that creates. Plain, desert, hills, and mountains do not alter encounter distance variables unless one of the 3 modifying types of terrain also exists. If final encounter distance is 1 inch or less, then a confrontation will usually take place. Confrontation. Confrontation indicates that the adventurers and some monster have met at close proximity, and some interaction is likely to take place. There are, however, modifying circumstances. If the monsters are intelligent and would normally deem themselves to be weaker than the party of adventurers, then they will always seek to avoid such confrontation. If the party of adventurers surprises the monsters and elects to flee the encounter, they may attempt to avoid confrontation by using free segments of action to move out of confrontation distance and evade the monsters. Confrontation interaction can consist of any number of actions, singly or in combination. Parley and reaction, spell casting, missile fire, melee combat, etc. Movement. As mentioned previously, movement rates have been given elsewhere. These rates assume that a party of from 1 to 100 creatures are concerned. If more than 100 are in the party, reduce movement rate by 1 mile per day for each additional 100 or fraction thereof. But in no event should such adjustment slow the rate of movement of the party to below 50% of normal speed. I love this paragraph because it has this throwaway line that you could in fact have more than 100 people in your party, which really tells you the difference in scale that older versions of D&D assumed. where you would have your main PCs perhaps, but you could have any number of hirelings, men-at-arms. You could have a small army following you around in theory. Becoming lost. Any party not guided by a creature knowledgeable of the countryside through which the party is moving, or which is not following a well-defined course, river, road, or the like, or which is not using a well-drawn and correct map, might become lost. This is determined prior to the commencement of a day's movement. Determination is based on the terrain. So we have different terrain types. Plains is 1 in 10. Scrub is 3 in 10. Forest is 7 in 10. Rough is 3 in 10. Makes sense. Desert is 4 in 10. Hills are 2 in 10. Mountains are 5 in 10. Marshes are 6 in 10. Then we also have some directions over here where I think this is the direction you can veer off when you get lost. To find the direction of movement if a party is lost, roll d6. 1 through 3 indicating left, 4 through 6 indicating right. Each hex face is 60 degrees. If a loss of direction of 120 is possible, roll a second d6. 1 through 3 indicating a 60-degree direction loss, 4 through 6 indicating 120. In any direction, loss is possible. Roll a single d6 with results being read off clockwise, considering the intended direction of travel as 12 o'clock and giving 2 chances for complete loss and movement in the exact opposite direction. Thus, 1 equals right ahead, 2 equals right behind, 3 through 4 equals directly behind, 5 equals left behind, and 6 equals left ahead. I.e., there is no chance of the party ever accidentally moving in the desired direction when the die indicates the condition of being lost exists. Direction of lost movement is illustrated below. I like this very complicated paragraph, and then there's a little picture here which explains it much more easily. Maybe you should have led with that picture, Gary. Procedure for lost parties. As soon as the die roll indicates the party is lost, determine the direction. If it is onto a space which has previously been traveled over and mapped by the party, then they will recognize that they became lost. Tell them that they moved in X direction, rather than that which was desired, but they have seen landmarks and realized their error. If movement is into an area where the party has not already been and mapped, then immediately roll again to determine if the party will be lost the next day also. If no such lost direction is indicated, then the party will realize it has made an error the next day. But meanwhile, the described terrain as if they had actually moved in the desired direction, i.e. as if they had not been lost with regards to direction. This will, of course, result in the erroneous mapping of a space until corrected. If the party will also be lost the following day, the procedure above is followed until they are no longer lost. At that point, they will realize that they have not been moving in the desired direction or series of directions, but they will not know just where they became lost. They will have to backtrack and attempt to locate the last space which they mapped correctly, and so on again from that place. It must be understood that parties following a correct map will never become lost. Procedures are only for exploration of unmapped terrain. Rest. Movement rates are postulated on sufficient daily rest periods so as to obviate the necessity for any protracted rest periods of a day or more during the course of any journey. If normal movement rate is exceeded, however, then special rest periods in addition to any subsumed brief breaks in travel are required. This is detailed below. Forced movement. It is possible to make forced marches up to twice the distance shown for a daily movement rate. Such forced movement increases the daily rate in 10% increments, from 10% to 100% at the option of the party, to a maximum of double normal movement rate, but as soon as the total of 100% of additional normal movement rate is reached, or as soon as the party determines to assume non-forced movement, whichever first occurs, a mandatory rest period must be enforced. Rest period depends upon total percentage of forced movement. 10 through 30% equals 1 hour per 10%. 40 through 60 equals 2 hours per 10%. 70 through 100 equals 3 hours per 10%. To find the time required for enforced rest, simply find the total percentage of rest time and deduct this from normal daily movement rate. Thus, 30% means that 30% of movement the next day is deducted, as the party rested during that period. At 3 hours per 10% increment of forced movement, 70% equals 210%, so 2 full days, plus 10% of a third day must be spent in rest from the forced march. Failure to rest after normal movement is equal to 100%, means that beasts of burden have to have a cumulative chance of dropping dead of 10% per 10% increment of additional movement of any sort. Other creatures lose 1 level of ability or hit die in the same manner, until 0 is reached and exhaustion kills them. Such loss of vitality, whether by beast or burden, creature or character, requires a full 8 hours of additional rest for each such 10% increment, hit die, or level of ability lost. For example, a 12th level fighter who moves an additional 90% of movement after exceeding normal movement by 100% must rest 72 hours consecutively in order to regain 12th level of ability. Prior to that period of rest, the character is effectively 3rd level. I don't know if he could have made a more complicated system, but he simply gave it his all really there. If anyone understood how that actually works, please let me know. Adventures in the air. To be able to fly is one of mankind's oldest and strongest fantasies. In the world of AD&D, this wish can often be fulfilled. However, travel and combat in the air is often much different from that which takes place in the two-dimensional realm of the earthbound, so much so that it must needs have a special section devoted to it. Aerial travel. Long-distance aerial travel can be accomplished by use of either magical device or a flying mount. Certain magic items, such as a broom or carpet of flying, do not have limited duration of use, and thus are the most efficient forms of such travel, though a broom of flying may not be very comfortable for use for hours on end. Your players may want to know how far they can go in a day on a flying carpet or other similar device. For the purposes of long-distance aerial travel, assume every 3 inches of speed equals 1 mile per hour. Thus, a broom of flying with a speed of 30 inches can fly long distances at an average of 10 miles per hour and cover about 100 miles in a day, assuming 10 hours of semi-continuous travel during daylight. The above formula does not necessarily apply to short-distance travel. If your players are unimpressed by these kinds of distances, remind them that in a pre-technological civilization, they are little short of miraculous. Some of your players may have walked as far as 20 miles in one day. Ask them to remember how far it was. Flying mounts. Most flying mounts will be either griffins, hippogriffs, or pegasi. All of these should be very difficult to acquire, and even harder to train. None of these types will mix with the others. Griffins will eat pegasi or hippogriffs if given a chance, and hippogriffs confined with pegasi will bully-rag them whenever possible. Griffins are often nasty and bad-tempered. If captured when very young and trained, however, they can become fiercely loyal mounts. Their loyalty is non-transferable once fixed, so they must be disciplined and trained solely by the intended rider. The griffin must be trained and exercised by its owner on a fairly regular basis while it is a fledgling, up to age 6 months, in order to accustom it to his or her presence and the bridle, blanket, saddle, etc. When the griffin is half grown, a period of intensive training must begin, which will last at least 4 months. The daily routine must never be broken for more than 2 days, or the griffin's wild nature will assert itself and all progress will be lost. After 2 months of this intensive training, it will be possible to begin to fly the griffin. This will be a period of training for mount and owner alike, as the rider must learn how to deal with a new dimension, and he will probably have no teacher but himself. Imagine the confusing tumult of giant wings, the rush of air, the sudden changes in altitude, and you will realize why an inexperienced rider absolutely cannot handle a flying mount. Interestingly, it does take months in order to train a beast like this, which ties into the stuff that we've seen before in this book, where it's expected that PCs will undergo long-term projects, often months at a time, to accomplish things. And this wasn't a big deal because you could fast forward time, but more frequently you would have a number of other characters that you were playing, and you could just use a different character until the first one had finished. Griffins, like all large flying creatures, eat enormous amounts of food, especially after prolonged aviation. Moreover, they are carnivores and thus very expensive to feed. Care and keeping of a griffin will be a constant strain on the largest treasure hoard. Costs will probably run into the area of 300 to 600 gold pieces per month. It will require special quarters, at least 3 grooms and keepers, and occasionally an entire horse for dinner. Diet will differ, but similar arrangements must be made for all flying mounts. So this really makes griffins the type of creature that you're going to want to have if you are a king or a lord or some sort of noble who actually has land and retainers in order to help take care of it. That's interesting because it really does help tie the existence of a flying mount into the setting. So you're going to have a lot of people around you who are helping you maintain this crazy expensive. It's like having a Ferrari or something. Hippogriffs are not so difficult to train as griffins, but neither are they as dependable in a pinch. A training process basically similar to that previously described will be necessary, although occasionally an animal trainer can substitute for the master for short periods if he or she is tied up elsewhere. Once broken, hippogriffs may possibly serve more than one master. They are omnivores, and thus somewhat less expensive to feed than griffins. Pegasi are greatly valued for their speed, which makes them virtually the fastest things in the air. Their training is a long process similar to many respects to that of griffins. They will serve only good characters. All others will find them totally intractable. Like griffins, their loyalty is given to only one master in a lifetime. All flying mounts must rest 1 hour for every 3 they fly, and they can never fly more than 9 hours a day. During their rest periods, they will eat as if famished. This means meat for griffins and hippogriffs, and green living plants, preferably of a succulent nature, or fine hay and oats for pegasi. Use of more exotic types of flying mounts will generally require some form of spell control, such as a charm monster, though more intelligent ones may possibly give their permission and cooperation in certain circumstances. This does not ensure ease of handling and stability on the part of the rider, however. Likewise, griffins, hippogriffs, and pegasi can be charmed and ridden. To be able to fight while flying an aerial mount requires considerable practice. To become adept at aerial archery entails at least 2 months of continual practice. See aerial combat, aerial missile fire. Aerial combat. Most creatures which can fly do so by means of wings, either natural or magically augmented, such as inherently magical beings as demons and devils, dragons, griffins, etc. Most winged creatures must be constantly flapping their wings to provide enough thrust to keep their weight in the air. Some creatures are light enough and powerful enough to allow them to actually hover in one place, but most must constantly be moving forward. This means that aerial combat is nearly always going to be a swoop and slash, hit and run affair. Grappling of opponents in the air will generally result in both of them plummeting to the ground, unless they are at a high altitude and disengage almost immediately. Even then, it is a risky business. Only beings with the ability to hover, gain either through quick and powerful wings or some form of magical flight, will be able to engage in combat that resembles the round after round melee system employed in ground battle. It will therefore be seen that maneuverability is of prime importance in conducting aerial combat. Flying combatants, whether they are eagles or dragons, men mounted on broomsticks or hippogriffs, must make attack passes at their opponents, wheel about in the air, and attack again. Those which are more maneuverable will be able to change direction and speed in a shorter time than those which are less maneuverable, and thus have some advantage in pursuit and avoidance. To conduct an aerial battle, a DM must know the speed, maneuverability, and attack modes of each creature involved. Speed. Speed of flight and each creature is listed with the other information in the AD&D Monster Manual, and will be noted again in the list of aerial creatures at the end of this section. When conducting aerial combat that takes place entirely in the air, it will be convenient to convert inches per turn to inches, or hexes, per round. For the sake of standardization, all flying creatures can climb at least 1/2 and dive at least twice the stated movement rate. They'll be able to climb 1 foot for every 3 feet that they move forward, but they may dive up to 1 foot downward for each foot traveled forward, i.e. at a 45-degree angle. None of the above applies to creatures with Class A maneuver ability, which can move in any direction they choose. When diving, all creatures' physical attacks will do double damage to all targets which are not themselves diving. This includes diving attacks at earthbound creatures which come from a height of 30 feet or more. There is no damage penalty for attack while climbing. No creature will be able to climb above 5,000 feet due to lack of breathable air, as a general rule, but you may alter the ceiling if you wish. Maneuverability. Naturally, every type of flying creature maneuvers differently from every other type, but in order to make the game playable and aerial combat possible, maneuverability has been broken down into 5 classes. These vary from A to E, most maneuverable to least maneuverable. Note that the stated amount the creature can turn per round assumes that the creature is moving at full speed. Creatures moving at half speed turn as 1 class better. Winged creatures cannot move at less than 1/2 speed and remain airborne, except for Class B. Class A. Creatures can turn 180 degrees per round and requires 1 segment to reach full airspeed. Creature requires 1 segment to come to a full stop in the air and can hover in place. Class A creatures have total and almost instantaneous control of their movements in the air. Examples, the Djinn, air elementals, aerial servants, and quaddles. Class B. Creatures can turn 120 degrees per round and require 6 segments to reach full airspeed. Creatures require 5 segments to come to a full stop in the air and can hover in place. Examples, Fly Spell, Sprites, Sylphs, Giant Wasps, and Kirin. Class C. Creatures can turn 90 degrees per round and requires 1 round to reach full airspeed. Examples, Carpet or Wings of Flying, Gargoyles, Harpies, Pegasi, Lamassu, and Shedu. Class D. Creatures can turn 60 degrees per round and requires 2 rounds to reach full airspeed. Examples, Pteranodons, Sphinxes, Mounted Pegasi. Class E. Creatures can turn 30 degrees per round and require 4 rounds to reach full airspeed. Example, dragons, rocks, and wyverns. Attack modes. As mentioned previously, grappling in the air is usually out of the question. This means that many different creatures will use considerably different combat tactics in the air, and their natural methods of attack will often be substantially altered. The following list should help the DM determine how certain creatures will fight in the air. Speed and maneuverability class are also listed. For reasons of space and redundancy, not all flying creatures have been included. Once familiar with the system, the DM should be able to apply it to any aerial monster. Aerial Servant, 24 inches, Class A. If forced to fight, an aerial servant usually resorts to battering. Chimera, 18 inches, Class E. The Chimera is a clumsy flyer and prefers to use its breath weapon in aerial battles. It can use its claws or attack with one of its heads. Cockatrice, 18 inches, Class C. The cockatrice is not a strong, steady flyer and will not go above 300 feet unless provoked into one of its screaming fits of rage. In any case, it will never fly for more than 2 to 5 turns before landing to rest. The cockatrice's power to turn flesh to stone is an awful one, as it often need only hit to destroy its enemies, and those petrified in the air usually fall and shatter. Quaddle, 18 inches, Class A. The quaddle's favorite tactic is to throw loops around other flying creatures and constrict them so that neither quaddle nor prey can fly. Both plummet to the earth, but the quaddle turns ethereal just before impact and thus escapes being crushed. Demons. The Nika Demon, 36 inches, Class D. Though heavy, Nika Demons are powerful flyers and can build up a great speed and momentum. They act much like flying battering rams, striking for 2 to 12 points of damage when they hit, or as much as 3 to 18 if they hit another flyer head-on. Although this will also damage the Nika Demon 1 to 4 points. A Nika Demon will also try to run its prey close to the ground and then close for a grapple. The wings will be used to batter and confuse and slow their fall, as this attempts to bring its opponent down to the ground, where leverage and its full physical strength can be brought to bear. Demons. Succubus, 18 inches, Class C. Succubi prefer not to melee in the air or on the ground, and will use guile, treachery, and etherealness whenever possible. Type 1, 18 inches, Class C. These vulture demons generally slash with their rear talons. Type 4, 12 inches, Class E. Type 6, 15 inches, Class D. These two huge demon types will try to bring their foes to the ground, much like Nika Demons. Devils. All devils' power of illusion make them difficult and dangerous aerial opponents. Aranese, I think that's how you say it, 21 inches Class C. Aranese will slash with their envenomed dagger or use their rope of entanglement to foul opponents' wings and make them fall. Horn Devil, 18 inches Class D. Horn Devils will attempt to impale with their fork and rip with their tails as they pass. Pit Fiend, 15 inches Class D. These mightiest of devils will usually attempt to force their prey to the ground, where they can leisurely tear them limb from limb. Their clubs and tails are dangerous weapons in the air. Dinosaurs. Pteranodon, 15 inches Class C. These creatures' light bone structures make them unwilling to collide with other creatures in the air, but if necessary, they will attempt to spear with their long, pointed beaks. Their preferred method of attack is to drop upon earthbound creatures from above, lift them up to several hundred feet, and then allow them to plummet to their deaths. Genie. 24 inches Class A. Jinn, like all creatures of the aerial plane, are nearly impossible to catch in the air. When a swooping creature approaches them, they simply move aside. In addition, their ability to create illusions and become invisible ensures that all aerial combat will take place only when and where the genie desires. They are openly contemptuous of those who need wings to fly, or magical aviators, such as magic users and Ifrit. Dragon. 24 inches to 30 inches. Class E. Lack of maneuverability due to the large size may seem to put dragons at a disadvantage in the air, but their powerful breath weapons somewhat make up for this. On a dragon pass, a dragon can either bite or use its claws, never both. A dragon may choose to breathe on an approach and then pass and slash with fang or claw. Eagle. Giant. 48 inches. Class D. Giant eagles commonly attack with their talons. They share with their smaller cousins the ability to plummet almost to the ground and then suddenly break their fall and pull out or land safely. Ifriti. 24 inches Class B. As with Jinn, Ifrit use their invisibility and illusion abilities to good effect in aerial combat. Elemental Air. 36 inches Class A. Air elementals gain +1 to hit and +2 on each die of damage they inflict when fighting in the air. They move in the same manner as Jinn. Gargoyle, 15 inches Class C. Gargoyles will attempt to spear with their horn or slash with their claws, never both. Griffin, 30 inches Class C. Class D when mounted. A griffin will either slash with its forward talons or bite with its powerful beak. Harpy, 15 inches Class C. Harpies will either use their leg talons or a weapon in aerial combat. Like eagles, they can plummet straight down and then pull out. Hippogriff, 36 inches Class C. Class D when mounted. Hippogriffs fight in much the same manner as griffins. Kirin, 48 inches Class B. Kirin will generally attack with their horn to impale. Lamassu, 24 inches Class C. Lamassu will use their claws if forced to fight. They are hard to hit in the air, as they can dimension door away from an attack path. Manticore, 18 inches Class C. Manticores are clumsy flyers, but they will not hesitate to fling their tail spikes at opponents who come too close. See aerial combat, aerial missile fire. They can also employ their front claws. Men, like monsters, must behave differently in the air than on the ground. Most flying combat involving humans consist of magical or magically equipped flyers rising above a melee to gain a positional advantage for the purpose of spell or missile casting. This actually isn't as easy as most players would like to think it is, as the different forms of magical flight often have requirements which interfere with such actions. Levitation. Once effected, this spell takes no concentration on the part of the caster except during changes of height, as it is quite useful when a magic user desires to rise above a melee to acquire an open field of fire for his or her spells. The major drawback is that figures rising out of a battle are automatically assumed to be magic users, and will immediately attract most, if not all, of their opponent's missile fire. Recipients of the levitation spell who wish to use bows from their elevated position will find that they are not totally stable, and thus shooting is slightly more difficult. Such archers will shoot at -1 to hit. This is cumulative, subtracting another point from the archer's chance to hit for each successive round of fire until -3 is reached, as the archer becomes increasingly unstable. Continued firing will not lower the archer's chances beyond -3, and any round spent not firing, or fighting, will allow him to stabilize and start again at -1. slinging, casting javelins or spears, or actually swinging a weapon, such as a sword, will be at double the -2 hit for -2 hit for archery. For example, -2, -4, -6. Due to the lack of leverage and something to push against, it is impossible to cock a heavy or medium crossbow while levitating. Let your players find this out for themselves. Levitating persons are marvelous targets for flying creatures. They can generally be treated as earthbound targets, which are easier to get at and fight at a disadvantage. The DM should remember that although the recipient of a fly spell has full control of his or her movement, the height of a recipient of levitation is always under the control of the caster. And if that person is otherwise occupied, no vertical movement is possible. Of course, this does not apply to magical devices such as boots of levitation, although everything else in the foregoing section is applicable. Fly spells. Utilizing a fly spell takes as much concentration as walking, so most spells could be cast while flying, either while hovering or moving slowly, 3 inches or less. There is no penalty for archery when flying, assuming the archers are hovering. If they are moving, see aerial combat, aerial missile fire. But there are minuses for slinging or swinging weapons, and these are the same as the penalties for archery while levitating, i.e. -1 to hit, cumulative per successive round until -3 is reached. Persons using a fly spell, or a magical device which confers that power upon the bearer, such as a ring of flying, will move at maneuverability class B. Flying persons involved in ground melees attract missile fire much as levitators do. Flying persons involved in combat with other aerial creatures do so in the same manner as any other creature of their maneuverability class. Broom of flying. These devices must be moving or at least half speed to function. With practice, they can be controlled by the rider's knees, so an experienced broomsman can melee in the air. However, all spell use is impossible while riding a broom, although some magical devices such as wands could be used. Brooms are maneuverability class C. Carpet of flying. Carpets are the most stable of flying devices, and thus the most valuable. Although they are class C, as pertains to maneuverability, they can hover or move at any speed the controller desires, up to the stated maximum. While hovering or moving slowly, they are ideal platforms for spell or missile casting. Quick motion tends to disrupt magical concentration, even if the spell user is not the one controlling the carpet. They are not so easily adapted to aerial melee, as passengers will tend to get knocked off the carpet and fall to the ground. Attempts to weave straps or seatbelts into a flying carpet will generally destroy the Dwemer. Wings of flying. These devices are maneuverability class C, and the wearer must be moving or at least half speed to maintain flight. Although the wings leave the aviator's hands free for fighting, it is impossible to concentrate enough to cast spells due to the continual bodily motion involved. This does not prohibit the use of some magical devices that duplicate spell effects, rings, wands, etc. Like an eagle, the wearer of wings of flying can plummet a great distance and still pull out safely if the wings have not been previously damaged. I like how we have this list of how Class A through Class E actually works in practice, which is pretty nice. I kind of wish this was on the previous page, honestly, because that's where it came up. Flying mounts. All flying mounts will move at least one maneuverability class worse than normal when mounted. This applies even if the rider is as small as a halfling or gnome. The only exceptions to this are E-class creatures such as dragons, which are large enough to carry human-sized riders at no penalty. Normal spell use while riding a flying mount is of course impossible, although certain magical devices may be used. Pegasus. Class C, Class D when mounted. In flight, Pegasi fight with their front hooves. Periton, 21 inches Class C. A periton will attempt to impale with its sharp horns. Pseudo-dragon, 24 inches Class B. Pseudo-dragons rely on their poisonous stingers in aerial combat. Rock, 30 inches Class E. Rocks generally attack using their huge and powerful talons. Amazingly enough, considering their great size, they can plummet straight down like eagles and then arrest their fall by a sudden unfurling of their wings. Shedu, 24 inches Class C. Shedu will strike with their powerful hooves if they become involved in aerial combat, although their power to become ethereal always allows them to avoid this if they so desire. Sphinx, 24 inches, 30 inches, or 36 inches, Class D. The various Sphinxes nearly always employ their foreclaws in an aerial battle, though the roar of an Androsphinx is also a potent weapon as it awakens opponents and could make them unable to fly. As it weakens opponents, sorry. Wyvern, 24 inches, Class E. On an attack pass, a Wyvern will attempt to either bite or sting. Conducting combat. Conducting aerial combat will be much simplified if the DM will remember that most flying monsters simply cannot execute complicated maneuvers like barrel rolls or loop-de-loops. Most can do nothing more than climb, dive, and or turn, and all of these actions are easily simulated and quantified using speed and maneuverability classes. There are two methods you can use to conduct aerial combat. The first way is simple but less accurate. The second method is more accurate but requires the use of hex paper or a hex map. Though both can be done on paper, the best way to visualize the relative positions of the combatants is to employ miniature figures or other counters. A running record of absolute or relative altitude should be kept, either on a separate sheet or on a small piece of paper under each figure or counter. A simple method is to move each flyer in the direction they are facing at the beginning of the move, and execute the turn at the end by simply refacing the flyer in its new direction. Speed would be the actual inches of movement or some ratio thereof. A more accurate method entails the use of hex paper so that actual arc turns can be indicated and so that these turns may take place at any time during a move. Turns will actually take place through several hexes. The only exceptions to this are creatures from the elemental plane of air, which can turn on a dime in any direction they wish. A turn needs not to be executed through consecutive hexes. To illustrate, here are possible variant turns for a Class B flyer, which can turn up to 120 degrees in one round. The orders from the first example would read straight 1, right 60 degrees, straight 3, right 60 degrees, straight 1. Each flyer can move 1 hex per 3 inches of speed. Thus, a gargoyle with a speed of 15 inches could move 5 hexes, while a griffin with a speed of 30 inches could move 10. Keep in mind climbing and diving speed alterations. In both the simple and complex methods, movement should be simultaneous. If there are several players involved, you may wish to have them write down their moves ahead of time. The DM, of course, is not obligated to do this. If two opponents are clearly making for each other, and is within their ability to intercept, but their written orders would cause them to miss, some slight adjustment should be made. Aerial missile fire. For all missiles fired in the air, treat short range as medium, -2 to hit, and medium range as long, -5 to hit, as pertains to the chance of hitting. Fire at objects at long range will always miss. The above applies to missile firers on flying mounts or using a broom or wings of flying, only if they have spent several months in practice. Otherwise, they will not be able to hit at all. The range penalties also apply to missile firing creatures such as manticores. Treat as composite longbows as pertains to range. Note that the above applies only to those who are moving. Those hovering with a fly spell or on a carpet of flying will suffer no penalties. Those levitating will be penalized as delineated in earlier subsection attack mode levitation. Dragons and similar creatures with breath weapons, such as chimerae, will have a slightly harder time hitting other flying creatures. For this reason, moving aerial targets of flying dragons add +2 to their saving throws. Damage. Any winged creature which sustains damage greater than 50% of its hit points will be unable to maintain flight and must land. Any winged creature which sustains more than 75% damage will not even be able to control its fall and will plummet to the ground. This simulates damage to the wings, as in aerial combat the wings will be a prime point of vulnerability. Feathered wings are not as easy to hit as membranous wings, and in flight should be given an extra hit point value equal to 1/2 the normal hit points of the creature they support, for the purpose of figuring out how much damage needs to be taken before the creature can no longer fly. Thus, a griffin with 30 hit points would add on additional illusory 15 points in aerial combat, for a flight damage total of 45, and thus would be able to take 23 points of damage before it would be forced to land. In contrast, a membrane-winged creature like a succubus with 30 hit points would only be able to sustain 15 points of damage before it could no longer fly. Under no condition are the extra flight damage points to be added to the monster's actual hit points for the purpose of absorbing damage. A flying monster will only be able to sustain the normal amount of damage it usually takes in order to incapacitate or kill it, i.e., if the exemplary griffin above takes 31 points of damage from the dragon breath, it is dead. On a final note, remember that heroic aviators who leap into the saddle of their hippogriff and rise to battle without taking a couple of rounds to strap in will tend to fall out in the first round of melee, and it is 1 to 6 hit points of damage for every 10 feet they fall, up to a maximum of 20 to 120 points. Waterborne adventures. In due course, your players will evince a desire to travel by water. Rivers, lakes, and seas have always provided mankind with a means of transportation and livelihood as well. From the first raft and reed boat, I don't know what that is, ambache, and catamaran, the waters have beckoned man to come and explore. This form of adventure certainly awaits the participants of an AD&D campaign with a vengeance. Encounters are dealt with in Appendix C, random monster encounters, waterborne encounters. This being subdivided into fresh and saltwater encounters. Information regarding ships, their armaments, and crews is detailed here. The rules are general in nature to allow playing at any scale or upon any playing surface desired. Hex or square grid, floor, etc. General classes of vessels. Rowboats. Small boats with or without a sail, which are rowed by oars or paddled, fall into this category. A ship's longboats, dugout canoes, skiffs, and punts are likewise considered rowboats. A normal crew for a rowboat can be from 1 to 10 or more men depending on its size. Rowboats do not become equipped with armament and don't function well in breezes above 19 miles per hour. Barges/rafts. These are long, somewhat rectangular craft designed primarily for river transportation. A few larger and sturdier types are used for lake and coastal duties. Barges generally have a shallow draft, as do rafts, the former having a bow and side freeboard, with the latter having neither. The Egyptian Queen Hatshepsut's obelisk barge is a prime example of a working barge. Crafts constructed of faggots bound together or made of stretched hides, such as the umiak, are considered barges in most cases. The same is true of sampans and jangadas. Normal crew for a barge varies between 20 and 100 or more men, depending on the size of the crew and its purpose. If the barge is a working vessel, such as Queen Hatshepsut's, it is conceivable that it would require as many as 100 men, if not more, to man such a mammoth barge. Sampans and jangadas, on the other hand, do not require a great crew to man them. Sampans need only 3 to 10 men, while jangadas require as few as 1. Barges and rafts usually don't come with armaments, but can be so equipped if desired. These types of vessels do not function well in winds above moderate breezes. Galleys. These are long, slim-oared ships. Some of the earlier types in galleys are the Greek and Roman biremes, triremes, and quadriremes. These galleys have 2, 3, and 4 banks of oars. The type most commonly used in AD&D is the Drakkar, the Viking dragon ship. This is a square-sailed, oared ship having a single mast that can be unstepped. She is the easiest to maneuver in choppy waters because the planks are overlapped and riveted together, clinker-built. This gives her the ability to move with the waves instead of forcing her hull through them. Crew for galleys depend on their size. Some have as few as 30 men manning the oars, while others have been known to have 200 or more. Most galleys, because of the need for space for the men at the oars, do not venture far from land. The general construction is such that even though she is seaworthy, it is much more comfortable to be near land or sail the rivers and make camp on the shore. Armament on galleys ranges from a ram to ballistae. Some of the larger ones may even have a catapult. Sport a catapult. Merchant ships. This type of ship is mostly a small, wide-hulled vessel having a single mast and a lantine sail. She is not favored by merchants, but pirates as well. Not only favored by merchants, but pirates as well. She can be moved by sweeps at rowboat speed. Cogs, carracks, and caravels from the 13th to the 14th centuries are considered to be excellent merchant ships because of their sturdiness and the few sailors required to man them. Most ships of this type can feasibly carry 100 or more men, but because of onboard conditions and money, ships are manned by a minimal crew of at least 10 men, including the officers. Pirates are the exception when manning ships. They will fill the ship with men, sailing up and down the coast for about a week, plunder if they can, and then put into port. Typical armament of this type of ship includes ballistae and perhaps a catapult. Warships. These ships tend to be fast, but at most times not very seaworthy, particularly the early ones. The ultimate warship for the purpose of AD&D is the Now. She is square-sailed like the Cog, but features 2 or more masts and is of caravel construction. She also has a distinctive overhanging forecastle and a round stern. The crew of the warship generally consists of 2 or 3 men to work each ballista, 3 or 4 men to handle the catapult, and the rest to man the sails. It is possible to have 100 or more men on board, but because of the shortage of space for food and fresh water, the number is usually considerably less. Hull values. The hull value, or the defensive point value, is how much damage the ship can sustain before the sinking. At any time that damage reaches the 1/3 or more of this value, repairs must be made. For damage construction to a ship by various attack forms, see Siege Attack under Construction and Sieges. To determine the number of points each ship can have, see the table below and roll accordingly. Rowboat, 1 through 4 for the hull value range. Barge, small, 1 through 6. Large barge, 2 through 8. Small galley, 2 through 12. A large galley, 4 through 16. A small merchant, 6 through 36. A large merchant, 12 through 48. And a warship, 7 through 42. Repairing damage. Anytime damage reaches 1/3 or more, 1/3 to 1/2 of a ship's hull value, repairs can be made at sea. If the damage is more than 1/2, the ship must be put into port for repairs. The amount of time and repairs needed, as well as the cost involved, will be at the DM's option. Length and width. The average length and width of most ships is given below. It will be up to the DM or to the players buying or constructing them to determine exactly how long and wide any ship would be. And we should have a table of different lengths for different types of ships. Crew. See ship master and ship crew under expert hirelings. Wind direction and force. Wind direction and its force are important in determining if sails, oars, both, or neither can best be used in propelling the ship. Currents, of course, will aid or hinder the ship, but it will be up to the DM to decide what currents, if any, will be in the oceans. Wind force will need to be determined for movement abilities and damage if the force is above strong gale. So you could determine the direction by rolling a d8, that gives you the points on the compass. And the force of the wind can be determined by rolling a 3d6 to give you that bell curve. So lowest is calm, and then light breeze, which is 4 through 8. 9 through 12 is moderate breeze. 13 through 15 is strong breeze. 16 is strong gale. 17 is a storm. 18 is a hurricane. So this being a 3d6, you're mostly going to get moderate breezes with maybe some light breezes or some strong breezes. So anything really dangerous is going to be pretty rare. Any wind of strong gale force or better will have a percentage chance to do damage to the ship. There's also a chance for men to be blown overboard. The amount of damage and how many men may be blown overboard will be determined by the DM. Checks are made every 6 hours or until winds subside. A little shocked that Gary isn't giving us details on exactly how to determine how many men fall overboard. Come on. So we have, I think this is just for how much damage is done. Actually it does. Wow. So it actually does give you examples for how often those things happen. That's funny. Capsizing, broken mast, broken beams, torn sail and or fouled rigging, or a man overboard. So you have to roll depending on if it's a gale, a storm, or a hurricane every 6 hours. So only one person can fall over every 6 hours. That's lucky. Exhaustion. Exhaustion will occur after the crew has rowed at their normal speed for 8 to 10 hours or at maximum speed for 30 minutes. This applies only to galleys and any other oared vessel. Movement. Any oared ship can move forward from a complete standstill in one round. Galleys are able to do a pivot only if they are dead still in the water. This action requires a certain amount of skill, or else the oars may be damaged. Any ship wanting to turn must let her momentum carry her twice her length before such a procedure may begin. Movement from a standstill to normal speed. Small barge, 2 rounds. Large barge, 5 rounds. Small galley, 3 rounds. Large galley, 6 rounds. Small merchant, 5 rounds. Large merchant, 1 turn. And a warship, 1 turn. Speed. The table below indicates how fast ships can sail or be oared at normal or maximum speed. Normal and maximum speed. So we have a table here for different ship types, the ones mentioned before, with different miles per hour, whether you have normal sail, maximum sail, normal oar, or maximum oar. Burn damage of controlled fires. For every 10 flaming arrows, every flaming catapult missile, and every 5 dice fireball and up, for example, a 10 dice fireball requires a double check, that hits. Burn damage will have to be determined. Lightning bolts will have to be checked for burn damage at increments of 8 dice. Anything below that only does structural damage. See Construction and Sieges, Siege attack values. When a lightning bolt does burn damage, subtract 3 from the roll for the kind of damage that is done. For example, if a 15 is rolled, 15 minus 3 equals 12. 12 is the number on the table to determine damage. So I guess you look up the damage right here. Fire damage, roll 3d6, which can do light damage, light to moderate, moderate to heavy, or heavy damage. And then that translates into a number of whole points of damage. Light damage, almost no damage, requires no immediate attention. When a ship has sustained more than 3 light damages, consider it to be light to moderate damage. Light to moderate damage, minor damage done, no immediate repairs needed. When a ship has sustained 2 light damage and 1 light to moderate damage, or 2 light to moderate damage, consider it to be moderate damage. But he needs better names for these things. That is not easy to figure out. Moderate damage, a few minor repairs needed before the ship can get underway. When a ship has sustained 2 moderate damages, consider it to be moderate to heavy damage. Moderate to heavy damage. Many minor repairs needed or several major ones needed before the ship may sail. When a ship has sustained 2 moderate to heavy damage, consider it to be heavy damage. Heavy damage. Extensive repairs needed to ship's sails and mast, rigging burned badly. The DM will have to decide what part of the ship took damage. The amount will be determined by what did the damage to the ship. This will have to be subtracted from the ship's hull value. Ship's burning time of uncontrolled fires. Damage done to a ship by a fire that equals or surpasses the hull value is considered a fire that is no longer under control by the men aboard. Also, any fires magically fed and not countered have a 75% chance of spreading out of control due to the time, lack of men, or capable magic user, or other circumstances. So a rowboat, that's 1 turn. That's the amount of burning time. Large barge, 1 to 2 turns. Small barge is 1 to 2. Large barge, 1 to 4. Small galley, 1 to 3. Large galley, 1 to 6. Small merchant, 2 to 8. Large merchant, 3 to 12. Or warship, 3 to 12. Ramming. Before any battle in which ramming is intended, the mast must be unstepped and secured on deck. Ramming, which can only be done by galleys, must be done head-on at full speed, with the galley striking the target ship at a 60 to 90 degree angle. After striking, the ramming ship must backwater immediately or risk sinking with the ship it rammed, or being boarded by her crew if the hull is above the waterline. All right, I think we're going to have to pause there. It's been about an hour, and my voice is running out as usual. I can't usually go much longer than that, but thanks for joining me. And next time we will pick up with grappling and boarding around our Waterborne adventures. Underwater is coming right up, which is a little bit famous in the sense that it has plenty of information, which I think very few people have ever used, because no one really likes using underwater adventures because they're just hard to do. But I'm curious to see what advice Gary has for us there. So join us next time on reading the whole AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, and thanks for joining us. See you next time.